Well, welcome back. We are into the sixth session here. It's moving right along. Are you folks learning something out of this? All right, praise the Lord. Well, in this session we are looking at Wicca and the occult. I have a couple Far Side jokes for you. This one shows a guy standing next to the devil, and he's painted 999 above the door. And it says, well, I must have been holding the dang work order like this. And, I don't know if you find that funny or not, but this one has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but I love it. Oh my gosh, Linda, I think your Barbie's contemplating suicide. This poor little girl's down below, and the guy's going to push her doll out of the window. That's kind of sick, but okay. I want to tell a story in beginning here about the power of prayer. I have a couple stories to share with you, but this one I'm going to share now. When I was teaching at our Christian school, I told you that I helped start a Christian school. And for the first few years that I worked there was a young man who had muscular dystrophy, and he was bound in a wheelchair. His name was Robert. And I saw Robert grow weaker and weaker as the days and months went along. He became completely introverted as he lost his muscular strength and his ability to move around. He eventually had to get one of those electric wheelchairs that you just barely push with your fingers. And I was his teacher. I worked with him. We had at that time in the school an individualized system, which we've changed from since then. But so I would go to the individual students' desks and I would work with them. And Robert would only talk to me, it seemed like, for the most part in his life. He became very introverted. He was a great artist, and at times in his life he would talk to many people, but towards the last part of his life he would not. And his answers were very short, yes or no, or he might say hello if he was in a good mood that day. And that's about all he would say. And one night I decided to really pray for Robert. And I think others were doing it as well. I found out later, but my wife had gone someplace and I was alone in the house, and I just decided to really pray. And I haven't done this very often, but I got down on my knees and I just started praying, Lord, touch Robert. And I just kept praying that over and over again. I would pray different angles of that. And I kept my meditation, if you will, on that primary thought. Lord, touch Robert. I thought of the woman who reached out and touched the hem of Jesus' garment. I thought of others that simply got close to Peter's shadow and got healed by being under the shadow of Peter. And I thought about these and I prayed, and I just continued to pray, Lord, touch Robert. I did that for like 2 hours in a row. And then when I was satisfied with my prayer, then I stopped and went to bed that night. Well, just about a week or two later, I was in school teaching. It was morning time. We had just begun. And I wasn't the pastor at that time. Pastor Ken was there, and I was running the school. And Robert's mother, Barbara, who lived in a trailer across the street, came in and said, you have to come and see Robert. And so he convinced myself and the pastor that we had to go. And so we went, and we went across the street, and here was Robert, this introverted young man. But now he was crying, and he was tripping over his words, trying to express what had happened in the night. And he said, I was laying there in my bed, and he wasn't mobile. He could not move around. He was laid on his side. That's the way he would stay all night long. He was about 16 at this time, 17. And And he said, as I was laying there, all of a sudden this bright light came into the room from behind me, and it exposed everything. I could see everything. And he said, I felt this hand touch my shoulder, and it was like heat went from the top of my head through the bottom of my toes. And he said, I think that I experienced the touch of an angel. And here's this young boy that wouldn't talk to anybody about anything, just crying, telling us about this. So we took him over to the church, and we led him in prayer, and he gave his life to Jesus Christ. And then as soon as he did, he got baptized in the Holy Spirit, and he just started speaking in tongues. And this boy's life was dramatically changed from that point on. Now, some people would say, well, gee, you prayed for him, and you know, didn't he get healed? You know, because he didn't rise up physically. Well, as far as I'm concerned, a miracle took place, and he really got healed where it took place, where it needed to take place, and that was in his heart. Now, I wish that I had told Robert to start in the New Testament. He asked me what he should do. I told him, well, you know what? Here's what I did when I got saved. I just read through the entire Bible. So he tried to take that same track. He read all the way through the Old Testament, and he was part way through the New Testament when the Lord took him home. And I know that today Robert is dancing and rejoicing in heaven. I found out later that other Christians had been led to pray exactly the same prayer for Robert during that season of time that I prayed. And so I know many people were praying for him. The Lord touched Robert. Well, we're looking in this hour at the understanding of Wicca and the occult. And we see in this testimony at the top of the page, Stephanie Petringa, she said this was an article written about her. They have practiced witchcraft in Stephanie Petringa's family for more than 600 years, passing down secret arts from mother to daughter. By the time Petringa was 15, she had her own coven. The witches met secretly, usually at night. They prayed to the goddess Diana. They said little to the outsiders about their rituals. Her personal crisis came to a head early last year when she experienced an emotional breakdown. Although she had avoided churches in Salem, she contacted a Christian she had known years before. Her spiritual tug-of-war reached a peak a few weeks after her conversion. Things were so bad she was planning to kill herself by jumping off a bridge. Says Stephanie, I had it all planned, but I came to church in the morning, and there was a visiting speaker who said Jesus wanted to say something to me. The next thing I knew, I was on the ground crying for like 2 hours. He was saying things to me that only I knew about. It saved my life. Then I really knew that I was in the right place, that I wasn't going to go through all this alone. I was home. Now, the size and the strength of Wicca today. Well, there are approximately 20,000 Satanists in the United States. The Santeria has about 3 million in Cuba, and there's 800,000 in the USA. Now, this would be like in New York, and Florida would be large in the Santeria. It's kind of a mixture of Catholicism and voodoo and these types of things come together. You might remember down in Texas, I believe it was, in the early 90s, maybe late 80s, there was some killings near Brownsville, and they actually discovered bodies that had been sacrificed. That was supposedly the Santeria. Now, normally they sacrifice chickens, but they actually did people in this specific one. There are possibly 12 million spiritists in the world today, and there's 156,000 in North America. I had a friend who grew up in Portland, Oregon, and he went to the first Christian spiritualist church of Portland, Oregon. Imagine that. a church that was supposedly Christian and yet spiritualistic. His testimony is absolutely amazing as he got saved. Neo-pagans, there's about 250,000 of them in North America. And witches, there's about 800,000 in the world, and probably between 50 to 200,000 in the United States. These statistics, I believe, are pretty accurate. Probably more on the 200,000 level because of so many people embracing it today. Now, looking at American paganism, in Nevada, where I grew up at, south of us, more near Las Vegas, they have now what's called the Burning Man every single summer. And it attracts occultists and pagans. People will bring their families to this thing. I'm not sure what the current attendance is, but several years ago they had 20,000 people that showed up there. And they have this Burning Man, and you can see the Helco Hotel. And what they will do, the picture on the right, by the way, is the Burning Man at night. What they will do is they will actually put on mock dramas where they will drag priests or pastors through the sand, and then they will crucify them. They will sacrifice them, supposedly. All in fun, don't you know? And they'll expose their kids to it, and it's a terrible thing, but it's just one of the things that is taking place in America today. There is a lot of occultic activity, palmistry and Ouija boards. And Ouija boards are, I believe, the #2 selling game of all time. And then the reason that I put this picture over here on the right, this is actually a book cover that I have. It's the human aura. Now, it shows this aura, and I'm not saying whether our bodies give off heat or not. They have these kind of machines that will, look at giving off heat. I'm not talking about that, but these people get all caught up in these mystical types of things that don't focus upon Jesus Christ, that don't focus upon the Lord. Now, of course, one of the reasons that this is happening today is because, as was mentioned, there's a vacuum inside of people's hearts. They want to worship something, and sometimes the church is not answering the need today. It's not talking enough about the supernatural power of God and the fact that miracles are available today for people. And so they go seeking off into other realms where it seems like it's happening. But the reason that I put this down is because these names that are below the word human aura there, those are not the names of the authors of the book. Those are the names of demonic spirit guides that the author wanted to put on the book to show who had really written the book. We see Wicca happening. This is a picture of a man in San Francisco, a Wicca, who is about ready to perform some rituals. Over on the right-hand side, this is in Massachusetts, Salem, Massachusetts, where it says tarot readings by a Salem witch. You have to get an appointment to get in there. We see that America is drifting today. This is Cathedral Rock near Sedona. It's supposedly a New Age vortex. This is in Arizona. And looking at some of the statistics, 20% of Americans today classify themselves as New Agers of some sort or another. 23% believe nature is inherently sacred. Now, I don't have any problem with people thinking that we should be good stewards of the planet Earth. We should be, even as Christians. God's given us a creation to watch over. We should be good stewards of this creation. But this is different. This is people saying that they believe that nature itself, that the trees are sacred, that it's pantheism is basically what it is, that God is in these types of things. 24% have practiced transcendental meditation. 30%, as I mentioned before, believe in reincarnation. They actually hold to some form of reincarnation. And 36% read their horoscopes. Think about that. In the newspapers, these people really believe that somehow they're going to read their fortune in these news columns. I mean, how different is that than the Shintoists in Japan that go and actually purchase a fortune, and then if they don't like it, they tie it on a tree? Well, right here in America, we have 36% of the people that read their horoscopes thinking that somehow they're going to get guidance from the stars about their lives. Now, ancient history of witchcraft. Number one, some say it is the oldest religion and that it predates Christianity. Write oldest religion in the blank there. Some say that it is the oldest religion and that it predates Christianity. Ancient Druid priests, Mesopotamians, Egyptians, Greeks, and Romans used white magic and sometimes black magic. This magic was used for healing, harnessing nature's power, seeking military victories and political offices, or for the misfortune of others. Under number 3, we see some examples. The witch at Endor, 1 Samuel 28, 7 through 15. These are in the Bible. This says, "Then Saul said to his servants, 'Find me a woman who is a medium, that I may go to her and inquire of her.' And his servant says, 'There is a woman who is a medium at Endor.'" And this word medium can also be translated witch or sorceress or, spiritist. And they kind of have a commonality there with this specific story. We see Jezebel used witchcraft in 2 Kings 9:22. "Now it happened when Joram saw Jehu that he said, 'Is it peace, Jehu?' So he answered, 'What peace, as long as the harlotries of your mother Jezebel and her witchcraft are so many.'" We see under C that Manasseh used witchcraft, sorcery, and mediums before he repented. 2 Chronicles 33:6. "He caused his sons to pass through the fire in the valley of the son of Hinnon. He practiced soothsaying, used witchcraft and sorcery, and consulted mediums and spiritists. He did much evil in the sight of the Lord to provoke him to anger." In the New Testament, the word witchcraft, I skipped letter D there. Letter D, the word witch in Hebrew actually represents a woman who has a familiar spirit. This is a spirit that is so familiar with the woman that the woman doesn't know if it's the spirit doing it or the spirit doesn't. The spirit, they're that close. Under letter E, the New Testament calls it a work of the flesh. We say that, see that in Galatians 5:19. The New Testament Greek word for witchcraft is pharmakeia. It's pretty obvious that the word pharmakeia is our modern word for pharmacy, and that's because in witchcraft they use drugs for two different purposes. One is for healing purposes, the other one for medicinal, and the other one is to get high, so that they can gain magic power. When I was a hippie, when I was searching, we would read Carlos Castaneda's A Yaqui Way of Knowledge, Don Juan in Mexico, and A Yaqui Way of Knowledge, and we would smoke a peyote, or we would drop mescaline, and we would try to see if we could see the green god, mescalito, because if you just kind of grew in this knowledge and this wisdom, and you actually got a sight of this green god, then you would become more wise. You would grow in your wisdom and your understanding. There's a lot of people like this in the world today. You can see some other sources under letter F there. Acts 8 talks about Simon the sorcerer. Acts 13 talks about Eliamus the sorcerer. And Acts 16 talks about a slave girl possessed by a spirit of divination. And by the way, that word spirit of divination, that is the Greek word puthon, which actually is Python, and it's the snake. She was possessed by the spirit of the devil, basically. Now, biblical insight, these are forbidden by God. We see in Deuteronomy 18:10 through 12, I wrote it out there for you. There shall not be found among you anyone who makes his son or his daughter pass through the fire, or one who practices witchcraft, or a soothsayer, or one who interprets omens, or a sorcerer, or one who conjures spells, or a medium, or a spiritist, or one who calls up the dead. For all who do these things are an abomination to the Lord. And because of these abominations, the Lord our God drives them out from before you. Now, notice this second point. Many times people focus more on whether these practices have any genuine validity to them rather than the fact that God forbids them. Now, I want to make a strong point here. You know, I was all caught up in the occult. I knew people that were in the occult. I, practiced all kinds of things in my search in those days. And when you are talking to people that are caught up in the occult, don't tell them that what they are experiencing has no power or no validity to it. Don't tell them that, because they're living in the midst of it. Don't tell a guy like me that astral projection is not true, that you can't do it, because I was there. I did it. But here's the point, is it's not about whether there's any power in it or not. The fact is there's no salvation in it. People might find power in certain things. People find power in money, but that doesn't mean there's salvation in money. When we look at the Old Testament, we look in the courts of Pharaoh. We look at Moses standing there with the magicians. Moses threw down his staff. The Pharaoh's magicians threw down their staffs. Their staffs became serpents as well. I mean, to say that there's no power in those things, we are missing the point as Christians. The real point is there might be power in it, but it's only for this life, and it's limited, and it will lead them into the pit of hell. There is no salvation in it, is the real issue. Consider present-day occult activities in light of this scripture. If these practices were abominations then, are they still abominations today? You bet they are. If because of these practices the Lord drove them out from before Israel, what stand should the church take today? Well, the fact is that if America gives way to the kind of occultic activities that were happening in the land of Canaan before the children of the promise came in, then I believe God will probably drive out what's happening here too. Very interesting. When you look, some people think, well, gee, why would God give the people, the Hebrew children, the children of Israel, the promised land? I mean, didn't that belong to other people? Well, it says right there in Deuteronomy chapter 18, for all who do these things are an abomination to the Lord, and because of these abominations, the Lord our God drives them out from before you. It's because of what the practices that were going on, that they were allowing to happen, that God gave the land to the Israelites. Now, we move along there, we look at the Middle Ages, and we see that, number one, in Europe, witchcraft experienced a revival because superstition and belief in the supernatural spirits abounded. I didn't write in the word superstition, so you'll need to write that in there. Witchcraft experienced a revival because superstition, I didn't put that in red there, but that should be in red, because superstition and belief in the supernatural spirits abounded. It was during this time where the word coven originated. This is a variation on the word covenant. And we see that there were two requirements during this time to join. One was by free will choice, and the other one was devil worship. And then finally, unfortunately, we see the Inquisition started by Pope Innocent VIII in 1484. He really wasn't so innocent, because he started a 300-year nightmare of persecution, accusations, and condemnation of more than 100,000 people. Here's the way it would work. in the name of Christianity. They would take people, they would tie them with stones and throw them into a river, a deep river, and they would say that if they were innocent, then they would float. If they were guilty, then they would drown. And so, of course, everybody drowned, and so they were all guilty. That was their stupid rationalization in those days. Now, in America, the hysteria, you can see it under number 2 there at the top of page 46. The hysteria was not as rampant in the colonies. Before 1692, 12 had been executed in the Massachusetts colony, but then hysteria occurred and 22 were hanged in Salem at the witch trials. But actually, the clergy cried out for mercy on behalf of the accused. Most people don't realize that it was actually the clergy that were saying, don't kill these people. You know, you'll regret it. This is not good what is happening. And then letter B, within a few years, the mood of New England changed and there was a public apology that was issued from the governing officials. Now, I don't have this in your notes. I just kind of wanted to present this to you. The name Wicca comes from an old English word from which we derive witch and wicked. It is often said by witches to mean wise ones. That's what they think of the word. When they think of the word Wicca or witch, they think of it means the wise ones. But the etymology of the word goes beyond that to an Indo-European root, the word wick, that means to be bent or twisted. To be bent or twisted. And this comes from a pastor that I met in California who he lives in Yuba City, and that whole area there is just surrounded heavily by all kinds of occultic things, and the church there is doing a mighty thing in standing up, actually seeing witches converted and saved, and people out of great demonized lives. As a matter of fact, in his church, he has 2 of the former children of Anton LaVey, who actually started the Church of Satan. 2 of the children. Now, Anton LaVey had legitimate children. He had illegitimate children, so to speak. But these are 2 of his children actually got saved and gave their lives to the Lord. That's a good place for a praise the Lord right there. Now, in modern history of witchcraft, we see Gerald Gardner. Gerald Gardner was the father of modern witchcraft. His involvement in Freemasonry, Rosicrucianism, magic, nature worship, Satanism, nudism, and the emphasis on a mother goddess has brought a whole new twist to witchcraft today. Modern witchcraft bears little resemblance to the past concepts of an old hag with a black pointed hat, broomstick, and brewing up spells in the cauldron. It's kind of vogue today, or chic to be a Wiccan, you know. It's acceptable. It's becoming more acceptable. I believe it was in 1999 that the military started allowing Wiccan services on their bases, because, you know, now here's that remember we studied the last hour about, you know, society's external pressure or the inward pressure, you know, which is right, and the balance in between the two. Well, here it goes. You know, our Constitution was never created to allow all of these religions to come in. We were a Christian nation. You study it out. Our Constitution, I believe it was John Adams who said it was made for a moral people and it was made for a godly people. And that if our nation ever became anything other than that, our Constitution would not be able to bear it, because people knew how they were supposed to behave in those days. They knew who they were supposed to try and be in society. There were not a lot of ulterior motives going on for these types of things. But today, unfortunately, in our country, freedom of religion supposedly embraces everything. And so we give everybody a fair deal, so to speak. Now, under the beliefs and practices of modern witchcraft, we see, you know, just beautiful portraits. This one by Jonathan Bowser, who gave me permission to show this painting of his. You can see in the painting the beautiful waterfall with the woman in it, the dove flying overhead in the clouds, the rocks have various animal formations, and this is the way that Wicca thinks of itself today, as these nature lovers. And so there's a veneration for nature. We see the main deity is the great goddess Diana. The great goddess Diana, right? The great goddess Diana there next to the main deity. The great goddess Diana. She's also known by these other names: Artemis, Astarte, Aphrodite, Hecate, Isis, the Magna Mater, and others. Now you can see that small picture on the right-hand side. That's the way they pictured Diana in the Middle Ages. Notice the way that some picture her today. This beautiful, flowing, angelic figure with birds flying around her. I mean, who wouldn't love something like that? You know, I mean, people are just drawn to it because that's the way many picture Diana today. Now, notice biblical insight, Diana of the Ephesians. You can actually read about Diana in Acts 19, 23 through 41. This is where Paul and others are there, and they're confronting the trade of the idol makers. And the idol makers are not happy about it, and they cause a great uproar in the city, and people are shouting, "Great is Diana, great is Diana." And the one thing you need to understand is that there's kind of a variation on Diana in the various cultures. Notice that bottom point at the bottom of page 46. The Diana of the Ephesians is not exactly the same as the Diana of the Romans or the Artemis of the Greeks. The Roman Diana was the moon goddess, daughter of Jupiter, twin sister of Apollo, and represented as a virgin huntress. This is the counterpart of the Greek Artemis. But the Diana of the Ephesians, get this, is a combination of these with the many-breasted, lewd Semitic moon goddess Ashtaroth. So that Diana back then was really a strange individual, if you will, very lewd. And this Diana actually has connection to all of these. One thing I want you to write down someplace, because you might find this on the test, is that in Wicca, the primary god is a goddess, a female deity in Wicca. You also find this in Shintoism, that the primary god is a goddess. In these two you find it. There's other cultures as well, but I wanted to point those two out. Now, looking at number 3, the main male deity on page 47 is Pan. Write Pan there. You don't have to write these other ones, but he's also known as Apollo, Lucifer, Adonis, Cernunnos, Dionysus, Osiris, and Thor. And notice this word Baphomet. Baphomet. Now, you see the image of Baphomet here. When I teach on Freemasonry, this is, I believe, worshipped at one of their levels as they rise up the ranks in the higher levels of Freemasonry. But this is Baphomet, or this is Pan, or all of these other gods. This one specifically is pictured as Baphomet. You see the goat of Mendes, the head, the pentagram on the forehead, the secret symbols with the hands, the wings of the fallen angel Lucifer, the moons. Everything in this has occultic representation to it. Some beliefs and practices. There are a variety of minor pantheistic deities. This man invokes an oak tree deity, and he stands around with a group of people and chants in San Francisco Park. Now, beliefs and practices, there's a rejection of the Bible, of God, and of Satan. This is number 5. I want to point out to you what these symbols represent. The pentagram on the upper right-hand side is a 5-pointed star in an upright position. The top point symbolizes the Creator being ruling above the four elements of life, which are air, fire, water, and earth. The circle without beginning or end represent the deity. The star within symbolizes an outstretched human body. Together, they supposedly represent the deity's protection and wisdom. Now, down below, this is the satanic sign of Baphomet. Notice that it's shaped a little bit differently. Inverting the pentagram is done by Satanists and symbolizes the elements or material world being superior to the Creator. Now, why is that? Basically, it's because many Satanists, I won't say all of them, but many Satanists don't even believe that Satan exists. They are primary atheists, and they are humanists, and they believe that man is all alone in the universe, and so that we must help ourselves. And so rather than putting a god or a goddess at the top of the star, they invert it, and they say that material elements are over and superior to any thought of the Creator. It's kind of strange, isn't it, that Satanists don't even believe in Satan? Now, some do. Some do believe that Lucifer got a bad rap and that Jesus was really the bad guy. Lucifer was the good guy, Jesus was the bad guy. Now, this occult symbol, this is the horned hand. This is the sign of recognition between those who are in the occult. However, it is also used naively by many who identify with heavy metal music today. You see a lot of people using this sign, and it almost doesn't represent the devil anymore. However, it certainly does in certain groups. Beliefs and practices. Now, write this down. Write this down next to number 6. This is their creed. This is their creed. You see number 6 there on page 47 where it says Wiccan Read? Number 6, write this down. That ye harm none, do what ye will. That ye harm none, do what ye will. Write that down next to number 6. That ye harm none, do what ye will. This is their creed. They think that they can go through life, and as long as they don't harm other people, they're allowed to do whatever they want. There is white and black witchcraft. Now, I once had an encounter with a white witch, and it was in my senior year when I was in Reno at UNR in education. I had a couple guys stay with me. They were friends of mine from my searching days, and they were very occult. I didn't realize how much so at the time, and they were gay, and they didn't have any place to stay, and so I let them come and live with me for a few months. And so they were there, and I was witnessing to them and trying to lead them to the Lord. Well, I believe it was through them they introduced me to a friend of theirs, and the guy was a white witch. And for probably about 45 minutes, I was witnessing to this guy, trying to lead him to the Lord. And I started to ask him some questions. I said, well, what's the difference between a white witch and a black witch anyway? And he said, well, white witches try to do good for people, and black witches try to do bad. And the white witches don't even like the black witches. And I said, well, that's interesting. And I said, well, what do you both think about Jesus? And he said, well, white witches don't really believe Jesus exists, but if he does exist, they figure that he's righteous and a person of compassion. And I said, that's interesting. What do you think about black witches? He said, well, black witches don't believe in Jesus either, but if he does exist, they hate him because he does right and he shows compassion. And I said, well, that's amazing. I said, well, answer me this. What happens if what I'm telling you is all true, and someday Jesus is going to come through the skies as the Lord of heaven and earth and all of creation, and suddenly you're going to be confronted with the fact that Jesus is real and that he's the God and you haven't chosen him? And he said, well, white witches believe that if Jesus is God, then they're going to get down on their knees when he comes, and they're going to beg for forgiveness, and because he's a God of compassion, he's going to forgive them. I said, really? I said, what about the black witches? And he said, well, black witches say that if he comes, that if he truly is God, then they're going to fight him because of who he is. And I just started laughing. I really did. And I just said, let me get this straight. You think that you're going to fall down on your knees and ask forgiveness, and they think they're going to fight him. I said, get a clue, buddy. Today is the day of salvation. This is it right here, right now. If he comes, it's too late to change your mind at that time. And I said, as far as the black witches goes, he's going to open up his mouth and a sword of fire is going to come out and burn them all up. Well, that was kind of the end of my witnessing time with this guy. Kind of ended right there. But anyway, Lord, touch that man. Number 8, they also believe in a form of reincarnation, that the soul simply returns to the earth. The soul simply returns to the earth. Now, kind of interesting, I was talking about this pastor, Pastor Dave Bryant. I give him credit in Yuba City, California. He's had a lot of dealings with white and black witchcraft, and he said some things about white witchcraft. You might want to jot these down. He said that they have rituals for 3 things, for power, for wealth, and for love. That the white witches have rituals for 3 things, for power, for wealth, and for love. And that at first they come across as though they are very accommodating, that they really aren't trying to hurt other people. He says, but in reality, they quickly turn on you if they at all find out that you are opposed to them. And he said what the power really stands for is control. The power stands for control that they want. The wealth stands for greed. The wealth stands for greed, and love stands for lust. Love stands for lust. And so what they're really after is control, greed, and lust. And if someone treats them bad, then they take vengeance. And they figure that retribution is okay. Now, I do want to tell you this. Where do some people wonder, what's the difference between Satanism and Wicca? Well, Satanism, as I told you, is kind of atheistic in some way, but in one way it's the antithesis of Christianity. It's opposed to everything that's Christian. They're into Satanism. And if they exalt anybody, it would certainly be Satan as compared to Jesus. Whereas Wicca is almost like a whole different world religion. It's kind of like Buddhism or Hinduism or whatever. But here's where they cross over at. They both want power, and they're both into magic. They both want power, and they're both into magic. So sometimes you see Satanists dabbling into witchcraft or Wiccans dabbling into Satanism. Now, under letter B, the 3 degrees, you see the word covens there, and then they usually have 13 members, letter A. Letter B, 3 degrees, write these down. They have 3 degrees, initiation, trainer, and the high priest or the high priestess. Initiation, trainer, the high priest, or the high priestess. Those are the 3 degrees, the basic 3 degrees of witchcraft. Now, most covens operate independently. Excuse me. Letter 2, number 2, the rituals. One type involves a high priestess representing the goddess and a high priest representing the god. So in other words, Diana and Pan. There is much sexual symbolism that exemplifies the female and male forces of nature. Included are ritual kisses, invocations, and signs of the pentagram. Rituals are often done in the nude but closed to the public. The act of intercourse in ritual is rare but not unknown. Top of page 48. Some of the tools are the athame, which is the black-handled double-edged dagger representing the male component. You can see it on the cover of this book, The Witch's Bible Complete by Farrar. You can see the dagger sticking down through the cup. That's representing the male component. And then the cup symbolizes the female component. So you have the male and the female component. It's basically a fertility religion. It's kind of like Baalism, if you will, back in those days. And even their festivities line up with the idea of the fertility religion. I mean, look at these. Under number 3, the festivals. There are 8 seasonal festivals known as sabbats. Lesser meetings are called esbats. Letter A, seasonal sabbats are the spring equinox, the summer solstice. In fact, I just got a call right next to the summer solstice by a relative of mine. And they had somebody over from Japan who was there, an exchange student, and my cousin was worried because this woman was going to a summer solstice party. And so she was asking me, what's that all about? And I said, well, it's probably a Wiccan party, because these people were caught up in the occult, apparently. And I said, this is what, the witches do. So I kind of warned her about it. And you can see the fall equinox and the winter solstice. They have, under letter B, agriculture and farming sabbats, various ones mentioned there. And of course, Halloween, October 31st is the big one. Halloween. The origin of it goes back before the time of Christ to the Druids in Britain, France, Germany, and other Celtic countries. Samhain was the ancient Druid god of the dead. The Celtic people considered November 1st as the day to honor the dead. The name Halloween actually began as a Christian holiday called All Hallows Eve to honor the dead saints. Some church historians believe that All Hallows Eve was designated on October 30th to counteract the pagan influence of the celebration of the dead. The pagan influences increased and the church's influences decreased. Hence, Halloween is now the night that witches believe they have their greatest power as the spirits of the dead supposedly come forth to the homes to visit the living. I do believe that churches need to inform their people of this, that they need to educate their churches about it. There are certain ways that Christians go about trying to counteract this force in our society. Some put on harvest parties. I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but somehow there needs to be a different emphasis that's out there about Christianity. Some people prefer to do nothing. Others go out witnessing on Halloween. Whatever it takes to get the message out. I do not believe that we should be crude or cruel, but we should be honest and forthright and show compassion as well. Under letter A, under magic, this is the center of witchcraft. This is the center of witchcraft. And then finally, Revelation 9. You can write down these scriptures. Revelation 9, 20 and 21 says, the rest of mankind that were not killed by these plagues still did not repent of the work of their hands. They did not stop worshiping demons and idols of gold and silver and bronze and stone and wood idols that cannot see or hear or walk. Verse 21, nor did they repent of their murders, their magic arts, their sexual immorality, or their thefts. This is the NIV version. Revelation 21, 7 and 8. He who overcomes will inherit all this, and I will be his God, and he will be my son. But the cowardly, the unbelieving, the vile, the murderers, the sexually immoral, those who practice magic arts, the idolaters, and all liars, their place will be in the fiery lake of burning sulfur. This is the second death. Now, biblical insights, evangelism hints, Ezekiel 13, 18 and 20, the Lord is against the concept of magic charms and people who prey upon others by their magic. In Acts 19:19, you see them burning the magic books. I discovered the folks that I told you that were living with me, the gay couple, they actually were Wiccans. I didn't realize that at the time, but they had left all these boxes with me, and I kept them for 9 months. They were supposed to pay me rent. They had them in the storage unit, and they never did come back. And so I was forced to get rid of them when I left Reno, and I ended up having a yard sale. Unfortunately, as I was going through some of these boxes, somebody saw all these witchcraft books in them. Well, I took them, I put them in the garbage. I threw all kinds of detergent on them, trying to destroy them. But I found that the next day that somebody had come and taken all but 2 of the books that had been the most destroyed. Somebody had been watching me, and I wished I'd burned them. I wish I just burned them. Okay, well, that's it for this hour. Let's take a break.